green button, the one that goes. Okay. Whatever's best. I can do this. I can stand, whatever is the preference. I wonder, well, here's my question. Melanie and yours now.
Angelo,
He has a pen.
I had a clicky pen.
Clicky pen?
Yeah, I had a pen, but this is not. I grabbed one that's not working. This don't have nothing.
Can't you use that one?
Okay. Thank you. So found this. Let's see. The president. Found the president. senior advisor to Brilliant Corners.
Yes.
Right. Is that yeah, he needs advising. And I was like, what disappointing was I was just so excited to get on the phone, had to talk to him, see him. This mass, this guy. Yeah, but I think he arrogant too, though. He's been arrogant too.
Yes, always.
Always. So, which I'm used to that. I
I-
wasn't used to the like not.
I was, yeah, it's an issue that I'm constantly. It's not okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Melanie Campbell, President and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation and convener of the Black Women's Roundtable. And welcome again to our 11th annual Black Women's Roundtable Women of Power National Summit. So we're getting ready to release some real serious data. As a part of our summit this year, we partner with Essence Magazine every year for the last 8 years to release a poll or survey on what Black women want. We want the next president to address? What do we want Congress to address? What are the top issues of concern that we have? And so this year, we expanded that a bit and partnered with Brilliant Corners, one of the most premier polling and research firms in the country. And I'm so excited that we have Karen Finney, who is the senior advisor with Brilliant Corners, with us. And also we have Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver, who is founder and president and CEO of Insight Unlimited. So sorry, Avis. I know that, right? And also is editor, co-editor for our annual Black Women's Roundtable report that we will release some more research tomorrow. And so I want to thank both of you ladies, but I also want to now turn it over to Malika Jabali, senior politics editor of Essence, to bring her remarks, and then we're turning it over to you brilliant sisters to really tell us what Black women are thinking.
All right.
Malika?
Good afternoon, ladies, and everyone over on the East Coast. I am Malika Jabali, as Melanie said, and I'm the senior news and politics editor here at Essence. And we are so excited to release this report in conjunction with Black Women's Roundtable. We are honored to once again be able to provide these results to show what issues are important to Black women. We've been doing this for numerous years with Black Women's Roundtable. And a big thank you to Karen, who's out there, and Cornell Belcher for conducting this very important survey. The results that they covered are consistent with our own reporting here at Essence Magazine. And what's so powerful about this poll is that we can go in depth with the issues that matter to us. So not on a superficial level, but we're asking people to rank the importance, to show exactly on what level these issues matter to Black women around the country. And this is also why groups like BWR and media organizations like Essence are so important, because we address those unique experiences that we may not necessarily get in mainstream narratives, but we make sure to put them in the forefront. The economic anxiety facing Black women is something that we've covered consistently. We know it's something that BWR is fighting against, and it is something that BWR is doing through their organizing. And so we have access to data that is consistent with that. So it's good to not just have the anecdotes, but to have the data that shows what we've observed, reported on, and fought against over the past year. So we are so thankful, BWR, for choosing us to partner with you, and we look forward to having this partnership year after year. and we'll see what happens in the 2022 midterms. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Malika. And we really do appreciate the partnership with you and your colleagues. It makes a big difference. You are our go-to Essence. We are Essence. And so we thank you again. So now, Karen,
All right.
over to you.
All right. Well, it's such an honor to be here. I'm really excited to present the results of this poll because, you know, what's happening with Black women tells us what's happening with the nation. And so it's critically important that we understand, and that's part of why we were so excited to do this poll. So this was a poll, a national poll of 601 African American women, and as you'll see, we had a range of women from 77 and up to our millennials and our Gen Xers. So we conducted the poll, I should mention, between February 28th and March 6th. So all the hot topics were in play. All right. So we split out the poll into several groups. As I mentioned, moms and caregivers, which we always want to keep an eye on. And I like to say caregivers because we know that sometimes when people report they have children in the home, they're caregivers in addition to being parents. A group that we're calling economically anxious. And I'll say this is one of the things that really just screams from this poll, if data could scream, which is the economic anxiety that Black women are feeling both personally and what they're seeing happen in the country, what they think is happening, what they feel is creating a lot of anxiety. We've got our Gen Z millennials, Gen X, our boomers, and this last group, the silent generation. Now that's our 77 and older, but I just want to be clear. That's a technical term. That is not to say that Black women over 77 are silent, because we know that's not true. So I like to always be clear on what that is. All right, let's take a look at the national mood. So the satisfaction in the country's direction, it's split, but there's a bit more negative intensity. And as I mentioned, we're going to see this throughout the data. One of the things we didn't just ask people, how satisfied are you? We asked an open-ended question. We asked, if you're satisfied or if you're not satisfied, tell us why. And this gives us some insight into those top reasons that Black women are saying they're satisfied or dissatisfied. If you're satisfied, it's the country is changing for the better. They think Biden is doing a good job. They're happy that Trump is no longer president. People raise it. And remember, these are open ends that people just set off the top of their minds. If you're dissatisfied, it's because you think the country is headed in the wrong direction. And because continued racism and inequality. That's another theme in this poll that comes through loud and clear that I know has been an issue for several years at the top of Black women's issue concerns, and that continues. And then the third sort of top one I'll just mention is government mismanagement. And that's very consistent, as you know, with the way a lot of folks in the country are feeling that things just aren't getting done. So more than half of Black women say that economic conditions are worsening. This was a question that we asked sort of looking out at the picture here in the United States. But when we asked, how about you? How's your economy doing? How's your economic security? Look at those numbers. Most feel that they are actually falling behind. And this is really important for us to remember because while we're seeing all this economic news that says jobs are being created, yes, there's inflation, but some things are turning around, Black women are feeling it. And that's really important for us to pay attention because if it's happening to Black women, it's going to be happening throughout the economy. That's right. And in fact, there was an analysis I saw this morning that suggested actually the unemployment rate for Black women is a little higher than everyone else. So that might be part of why Black women feel like they're falling behind. We also wanted to ask specific questions about experiencing sexism and racism in their daily lives. So we asked, how often would you say you experience racism? Almost half say they experience racism often in their daily lives. Now, for a lot of us, that doesn't come as a surprise, but to see that in the data is really important, especially at a time when We know that as people start to go back to work, these issues around dealing with racism and sexism in the workplace, those are part of the issues that they're thinking about as they think about going back to work. Almost a third of Black women say they experience sexism on a daily basis in their lives. Now, I thought that was a little low, I'm gonna be honest, but it's still a lot. I'm not gonna, Let's talk about the political environment very briefly, and then I want to really dive in. So for the most part, President Biden enjoys popularity, especially among older African American women. We know that. We voted for Joe. I'm also happy to say that the vice president enjoys high broad approval among Black women, and as you can see, that's across age groups, so that's nice to see too. But a majority of believe that Congress don't like the job that Congress is doing. And so that's a message to lawmakers. I know you were on the Hill, Melanie, talking with lawmakers, and I hope they were paying attention to what you were saying, because this data is really important. As you would expect, overwhelmingly, Black women support the nomination of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. So we expected that, but that was nice to see. We asked about specific organizations, and this just gives us a feel for, as a thermometer, what organizations do you feel strongly about, feel positive about? Black Lives Matter, the NAACP, the Democratic Party. Not surprisingly, the Republican Party didn't do so well. They've got room to grow if they want to start to turn some things around. All right, what's the 2022 election going to be about? So we asked folks, and I will, as you'll see later in the data, Black women, this is March of an election year. Black women are highly motivated to vote right now. We expect that's only going to grow as we get closer to election time. And they intend to vote already. The top issues that Black women are looking for: improving the economy and increasing wages, combating racism, discrimination and systemic racism, protecting voting rights and saving our democracy, protecting the social safety net, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, tackling inflation, lowering the cost of health care, changing the country's direction. But I just want to note that these top 5 or so issues that folks say are critical for the 2022 elections: systemic racism and discrimination, the economy, voting rights, and protecting our democracy. That comes through loud and clear in this data. We took a look just to get a sense of where Democrats and Republicans are. If you just ask the generic question, who might you vote for? Democrats seem to be doing well, but it's a cautionary tale because they're a little bit behind where they were in 2018, which means, Black women are looking to see who's going to be responding to the issues that they care most about. Again, highly likely to vote in the midterm. As you can see, that's 74%. And their motivation to vote, 73%. And again, as you see, that is across all demographics. So we're ready to vote like we always do, right? Okay, let's talk about our issue priorities. Now, as I mentioned, they break down into 3 buckets. But one thing I want to make real clear: Black women always have a full plate of issue concerns. But what is clear in this data, the breadth and depth, that plate is overflowing in a way that is unusual even for Black women. And that was really something that was dramatic for us in this data that I'm going to show you. So what are the top concerns? The top 5, 6 concerns: making housing more affordable. We know that's an economic issue. Protecting Social Security and Medicare. Federal legislation to reform criminal justice and policing. We know we got to get that done. K through 12 public education. Making sure women don't lose the freedom to make their own reproductive health decisions. Big concern for women. Ending unequal pay. Programs that address violence against women. I know that's an issue that you've talked about quite a bit in previous polls. And fighting discrimination and systemic racism. Now, I want to point out This is on a scale of 0 to 10 that we ask people to rate. Look at that, the means, 9.2, 9.1, 9s and 8s. That means that is an intense level of concern about those issues. And then if you look across from top box and the percentages of women who care about these issues in our different groups, again, high percentages in every group have deep concerns about these issues. Just this page, that's a lot to carry. But let me show you this. There's a second page, because we asked them about a whole range of issues that have been asked about before. And again, many of these issues break down into economic terms, personal safety, voting rights, our health and well-being. Again, we're seeing 8s, we're seeing high numbers of levels of concern. So that's why we say this is an unusually overflowing plate of concerns for Black women. And folks better be paying attention, because they're looking to see who's going to respond. The other thing we found is that while Democrats enjoy an advantage on several issues, what is really striking, a third to a quarter don't see any difference between the political parties. So that's telling us Black women are looking to see who is going to pay attention to the issues that they care about, as we always do. And with that, that is the end of our presentation. And as I say, I think one of the most important things in this data is just the level of concern that women have on these issues, and the fact that they are deeper and a broader set of issues than I think we've seen in quite some time.
Wow.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. So first of all, thank you. And the things that you hear it anecdotally, you feel it, you live in it. We're living it ourselves. We're not immune to the data. So it's really important. I'm going to turn it over to our sister, Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver, to respond to the data that you heard, and then I'll make a couple of comments from there. And if we have anything online with questions, we'll bring them up.
You bet.
But those who are watching, if it's not posted, what you just heard will be posted for those who are registered, but it's also publicly out there now. Essence, you can go to our website at ncbcp.org, at ncbcp.org, and get a copy of what you just laid out there to share. This data, we do it so not just to just look at it, but to figure out when we're saying we're developing policy priorities as the Black Women's Roundtable, we needed, and it was, like I said, 8 years ago when we came together, because there wasn't enough data out there to tell us, so we can organize around that. We can develop policy agendas around that, and we can challenge the elected officials to hold them accountable to those issues by having not just what we think is going on, but have the data to back it up. So, Dr. Avis.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on an amazing poll.
Thank you.
It's so important to be able to dig down deep into where Black women stand on these issues. And it really blew me away to see the various ways in which Black women are impacted, and they're sharing their story. What especially I found interesting is how you disaggregated by age and by generations. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to see the contrast and perspectives across the generations, right? So what I found to be particularly interesting, for example, this issue around, how you feel about the economy, that issue, and the economic direction. It really was sad to say that the oldest, the most mature generation, they were the most economically fragile, according to your research here. 68% of them were in that, it's getting worse direction.
That's right.
So they're really catching it. Similarly, Generation Xers, like my generation, they were the second most likely to say it's getting worse. So I found that very interesting, that you have women who are in their sort of probably retirement years, having a much more difficult time making ends meet, and those that theoretically should be in the prime of their working years also saying things aren't right here, things are actually getting worse. So I found that to be very interesting.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And again, I think it tells us that Yes, there are economic indicators that seem to say some things are getting better, but you always have to dig into the data to really understand what's going on with people and why sometimes what we think we see on the surface is not meeting people where their life experience is. And I agree with you, particularly and the other group that had pretty high numbers in that is moms and caregivers, 53%. And as we know, there's been a lot of conversation, particularly with the impact of COVID, on mothers and caregivers, whether it's around childcare and trying to go back to work, whether it is around issues around universal pre-K, some of those issues that the Black Women's Roundtable and NCNW and others have been trying to get lawmakers to pay attention to. Women are telling us they care.
Absolutely, they are. And then also, we're here at the dawn almost of another midterm election. And one would argue that every time we say this is the most important election, but I really feel like once again, we're at the precipice of another quote unquote most important election, because we know all across the country our voting rights are at stake. We know that if the national, the Congress and everything and all of those different places go in different directions, we might not be in the same space that we are right now, just in terms of the fundamentals of our democracy. So when I took a look at, people's feeling, not because I know Black women are going to vote, so I was not surprised to see those numbers. But what I thought also was interesting were approval ratings around President Biden, because oftentimes that's an indicator of how much enthusiasm people are going to have going into a midterm election. We know that historically the party in the White House tends to take a hit with that first midterm election, and it would be very interesting to see if we can sort of counter that trend. But once again, as I'm looking at this, I'm really quite interested in the sort of generational differences here. In terms of the net approval ratings, once again, our most senior sisters are the most enthusiastic about President Biden. But it looks like, to me, both the economically anxious as well as the youngest, the Generation Zs, to me, the Democratic Party needs to pay attention, because this is the future of the party. And when you're at a place where you have only 35% of Generation Zs and millennials indicating that they have support for President Biden, that not only, to me, does not bode well for this upcoming midterm election, that does not bode well for the future of the Democratic Party.
That's right. And look, as we know, people feel many times when they go to vote, what have you done for me lately? Yes. That's the question. Let's talk, what are some of the issues that young people, this generation, cares about? College debt and college affordability. That's an issue that so far is still on the table. It hasn't been taken care of. Yes, President Biden and Vice President Harris have gotten a lot done for the country, but I think this data also shows people are still watching and waiting and looking for what's going to motivate me to believe that you've got my best interests at heart. And I agree with you. At 30% on that economically anxious group and 35%, we've got to get those young people. If Democrats want those votes, they've got to get those young folks motivated. It also suggests conservatives, that's a potential opening. If young voters aren't feeling it, they're going to look for, well, who's talking to me?
Or they're going to stay home.
Or they stay home.
Absolutely.
That's right. That's
Absolutely.
exactly right. That's exactly right.
They can definitely vote by not voting. You got that exactly right. I was also, once again, this is one of those findings I wasn't surprised, but it's certainly gratifying to see the overwhelming support for a Black woman on the Supreme Court, right?
Yes.
Nearly 3/4 of Black women said, oh, hell to the yeah, we need a sister there.
Yes, we do. Yes, we're here for that. That's right. That's
So
right.
I absolutely love that. I also have to say, when I looked at this issue of, what are the Democratic Party versus Republican Party on several issues, one area that I do think is important to point out, you had a question here around they're trying to undermine democracy, right?
Yes.
Which I think, once again, is a very important issue. And it really, really hit home for me that, 45%, nearly half of black women really do see that the Republican Party is, in fact, fighting against democracy. They see the attacks on voting rights across the nation. They see the intransigence in terms of voting rights here on Capitol Hill in terms of pushing through a voting bill. And so, I think that's an issue that is very clear. What do you think that the Democratic Party can do? Do you think the Democratic Party can do some work to sort of rally people around that in terms of increasing enthusiasm for the midterm election?
Well, certainly in meetings that I've actually been in with Melanie here, we've met with the vice president a couple of times on this issue, and obviously Melanie's been in other meetings. We need an all hands on deck, every lever of government approach. Whether you are a local county official, a mayor, state legislator, governor, secretary of state, all the way up to the president. We need to be, and I think it's important. We can't just say folks are going to, we can't just out-organize. We can't just assume people are going to wait in line for 6 hours because that's what we do. No, we've got to do better. We owe better to our voters to make sure that we're getting, if they can't get the whole package passed, let's get it passed by pieces.
Well, the other part of that is, you said can't out-organize, right? Even if you do organize, if you can then change my vote or take over the local boards of elections and then throw people like Helen Butler off of the local boards of elections in Georgia, right, and all these voter suppression laws that are taking place. I just want to add this, Avis. One of the things that I did want to make sure that we pointed out, this is our 8th year. Yeah. So this would be the 4th year in a row. In those first few years, it was aspirational.
Yes.
It was things like, you wanted to, increase your wages. That's aspirational. College affordability. Those kinds of things are aspirational, right? Upward mobility. 4 years in a row, this went much deeper, right? Mm-hmm. Racism, systemic racism, right? What was important, that was important that didn't show, and I think you all did something more around COVID.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't mean COVID's not important.
That's right.
Voting rights were not high up because we didn't have the attack like we had after the January 2020 election. Mm-hmm. So to see that rise up to the top, where we thought we had, even though we had problems, because the
right,
Supreme Court had been doing the right thing and still not, right? When it comes to dealing with constitutional issues, it's really important that we pay attention to the fact that across generations, voting rights. And I was in Selma, Alabama, where we did, where Vice President Harris was there, and a whole bunch of cabinet members, right? A lot of speeches.
Everybody came.
And we crossed that bridge. But when we came across the bridge, and then you see, really it's hard, if you've ever been to Selma, you really don't know who all is there till you cross the bridge, because everybody's kind of all in the cubby holes, if you will, because it's a small town. But to see the sea of our people, black and white, there were so many young people showed up in Selma.
Wow.
So this issue around voting rights is definitely going to be there, as well as racism. I just wanted to add that.
I wanted to add something, too, to what Dr. Avis said. So we did see 45% of black women see the Republicans as undermining democracy. Two other really important numbers around these topics. 45% also see the conservatives as spreading harmful misinformation about COVID.
Oh, wow.
That's life and death for us.
Sure is.
Right? And so we know what's going on. That's the other thing that's important for us to recognize in this data. Last number I'll point out again, 54% of black women see the Republican Party as trying to steal elections. And that, as we know, is not just what's happening here in Washington. As you said, it's what's happening in Georgia. It's what's happening in North Carolina. It's what's happening in Texas. It's what's happening all across this country with this wave of anti-voter legislation. So when we talk about what can Democrats do, that's why I say it's got to be at all levels that Democrats, whether that is
Nonpartisanly speaking.
that is nonpartisanly
Yeah, this
speaking.
is just strategy.
Just strategy. But even if, I don't care what your political affiliation, if 54% of black women are saying they believe Republicans are trying to steal elections, that's a problem for both parties. That's a problem for America, right? Because as we know, as you said, we used to, before January 6th, it was, well, wait a second, we can at least agree who won the election. We can at least agree we're going to have an inauguration. And yet the big lie has deepened the partisanship, the division, and the politicization around COVID continues. And the attacks on our poll workers, on our workers at the local level. And so I think seeing these numbers reminds us, black women tend to be a lot of those workers, let's be honest. We see what's going on and we are deeply concerned about it.
Absolutely. And just lastly, I'll just point out, it shows you the degree of savviness of the black woman voter. She's not being fooled. The wool is not being pulled over her eyes. She can tell the difference between truth and a lie.
That's right.
And she understands what's at stake. And so I really appreciate you digging down into the data and bringing that to light.
Thank you. It was our honor. Do you want to see if we have any questions, Mel? Great. And we're going to get them by the very technically sophisticated manner of an iPhone. We are multimedia here. Oh, you want to read it? And we can all, or I can.
Okay. And you all can respond.
Sure.
What does this year's poll say? What does this year's poll say is different from last year's poll, which I think we talked a little bit about that. What are the biggest shifts, if any, and what does that say about the people, our people in power now? That's the first one.
Well, again, I think one of two things, right? Number one, this isn't necessarily a change, but that racism and systemic racism, criminal justice reform, these issues are still so top of mind and so potent and deep for black women, tells us something, tells us our work maybe isn't done, as we know. Number two, the deepening of the economic anxiety and just, as I said, this overflowing plate of issue concerns tells us that, you know, black women are really trying to hold it down, but it's getting harder. That's what it tells me.
Thank you.
Dr. Avis, anything you want to add?
Ditto.
Okay. You know you did a good job when you get that kind of approval from Dr. Avis.
This poll was fielding during the outrage of the war in Ukraine, which led to a severe spike in inflation. Yeah, that $5 in gas prices shocked me. I'm like, why did I buy SUV last year?
Right.
How much of the economic anxiety stems from that?
Well, I don't think the data can tell us that directly, but again, the couple of things I would point to is the overall feeling that the economy is not headed in the right direction, and then that, as we mentioned in the beginning, that feeling that 50% roughly said they feel like they're falling behind. Mm-hmm. And when we asked about in the issue battery, there's a number of issues that I think play into how we feel about the economy. I'll just touch on a couple of them. Unequal pay, that's an economic issue for women. Mm-hmm. When we talk about lowering taxes for working families, that was another issue that was very high concerns. Rising cost of living, bringing down the cost of health care, housing. So I think what the data is telling us from an economic standpoint, there are a number of issues that are likely playing into those numbers. I can't tell you directly, but that's certainly what it seems like.
Well, let me ask you this question. I know we're getting to a close unless we have any questions. Because I see that the the women who responded said they felt like the administration is, they still had confidence in the administration, right? So there's some positives in that.
Yes.
And then to see when they looked at like who they're blaming or who they don't trust, and this is not being partisan, just facts, right? That's what data gives you, facts, if you want to believe in facts.
That's right.
That the party, one party is better than the other in that regard. So I guess the question would be, if we are feeling the anxiety and feeling we're not doing well, but yet we're still trusting. And the last thing I thought was interesting was to see when you asked the who organizations, and so you had Black Lives Matter and NAACP, and that is very, very heartwarming to me, because you see what they want to call legacy organizations still standing up, and our newer generation organizations, movements. I think that's a great thing, because you had such a mix of generations in the poll. So I thought it was important to lift up some of those positives about what the poll said. As we always struggle through, we always are in, we're always challenged.
That's right.
But somehow we find some way to see that it can be a better day.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely right. And I think that also goes to something we asked in the poll that I talked about earlier on, which is when we asked the open-end, we just said open-ended. If you're feeling good about how things are going, tell us why. The country is changing for the better. 38% said that. So even though they're feeling economic and other anxiety, they're hanging in there. They think things are turning around. Biden is doing a good job, 27%. This is not partisan. This is literally what the data says. Happy that Trump is no longer president. I think that shows, as you said, confidence in our leadership. But it says to our leaders, you best pay attention.
It does.
And deliver.
It does. And it was just one other thing I do want to mention about the economic anxiety. We just know that Black women suffer a double wage gap. The reality is that our wage gap is not only influenced by our gender, it's also influenced by our race. We only make, about 63 cents to the dollar of what white men make, and only about 73 cents to the dollar of what white women make. And so the problem is that we're severely underpaid, and that decreases our buying power in normal circumstances, right? And so when we're in a situation now where we are experiencing inflation, and you have less money which to combat that inflation, we are at a severe disadvantage. And so I think what we need to focus on here is not just corrective action with regards to inflation, it's also corrective action with regards to wage gaps and making sure that Black women are paid fairly for the work that we do.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And that's an issue, like so many others, that we've got to keep fighting on, because again, women are telling us, we're watching, we're paying attention, this matters, this is what's impacting us. And as you said, Mel, I think they're still hopeful. There's hope, but we got to deliver, and we need our lawmakers and policymakers to pay attention and deliver as well.
Thank you. So we're going to give that virtual clap out there. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you to your partner, Cornell Belcher, Brilliant Corners. Thank you, Dr. Avis Jones-Weaver, my sister, both of y'all, my sister friends. I get in Foxhole with you anytime. And thank you for your brilliance.
Thank you.
And so when we talk about the secret sauce of Black women, this is part of it, right, ladies? And so I want to thank you all. Thank you all who tuned in. Share this information. Tell our story. That's just part of how we tell our story. And so our theme, what is also sitting here, I'm feeling, is our organizational theme has been for the number of years, but for the summit specifically, it is about rebuilding hope, achieving equity and equality. And so you see this on the stage. It's all about hope in the midst of the storm. And as a people, we've always had to hold on to that, to say how we got over, right? And so we thank you all for joining this segment of our summit. We invite you to come back. First of all, share I know the folks can't come physically because that we sold out. And we kept it at a limit because we wanted to make sure that we could make sure we created a safe, COVID-safe as much as possible environment. To do that, we had to limit the amount of people who could come. But we did not limit the amount of you all who can join us virtually. And I'm hearing the folks are having a great time on the platform. So share. They can go to BWR Summit, BWRsummit.eventbrite.com, BWRsummit.eventbrite.com. So join us about 7 o'clock is our next segment of the summit. And yes, this is a Women of Power National Summit. We have women and girls, but we all have a few righteous brothers. So my dear friend, colleague in the civil rights movement, Mark Morial, president and CEO of the National Urban League, wrote a book not too long ago called The Gumbo Coalition. And so he's coming by to have a fireside chat to talk about the power of coalition, the power of unity. And so join us at 7 o'clock, 7 to 8 p.m. Online, virtually. And of course, our sisters who are here will be here in person. So we thank you for tuning in and spread the word. Thank you.
The president, President Brian Riley. So I'm going to ask Brian to come forth at this time to give just a few remarks. Brian,
Hey, first of all, thank you. And if you've never been to Alabama and you can't understand us, we've got translators available. We can translate some of our slang and saying, but it makes us proud in Alabama where we are a very, very red state. You are in a state that don't like you or me. They don't like union members. They don't like black folks. They don't like working folks because we've worked hard to try to raise the minimum wage. We've tried to expand Medicaid. They don't care about working folks. They care about money folks. And we don't have any. If you go to work every day, you ain't got no money. If you got plenty of money, you fly out with Jeff Bezos and float around 15 minutes and come on back. So we're honored to have, in my opinion, and I'm going to kiss his butt a little in front of you, and I'm going to try not to cuss, but we've got one of the most dynamic international union presidents in the country here with Cecil Roberts. I had the pleasure to go to jail with him on this coal mine strike, and I'd go tomorrow with him. Even though I'm on probation, my wife, she's really upset that my damn record's been blemished. But if you believe that, I got something else I'll tell you later. But at this time, again, thanks for coming. Thanks for all the different international unions. Thanks to all the community groups. Thanks to the faith-based community. Believe it or not, my daddy's 89 years old, and he's still today the choir director at First Baptist Church of Old Hatchie, Alabama. Now, some of it didn't stick with me, but hey, I'm a believer. I've been baptized. I don't act like it sometimes, but like I tell my preacher, if everybody did good, they wouldn't need no preacher, so they'd lay his ass off. So I'm job security for the church. But hey, and at this time, I'm gonna ask Brother Larry.